Well, good evening. We want to welcome everyone to our Sunday evening Bible study here at the Forest Park Church of Christ. And unfortunately, back on this bench here tonight, not where I want to be, but it's where we are, and it's where we probably need to be for the next few weeks. I hope that you're together with your family, with your Bibles open and your hearts and your minds ready to think about God and to think about His Word. We do have a couple of announcements I want to get to before we get into our study. You might be opening your Bibles there to Matthew chapter 2. But just a few issues of housekeeping. If you would please text in your attendance. I know that didn't get announced this morning. So if you would text in both for this morning and for tonight, that number, if you don't already know it, is 229-375-8884. That's 229-375-8884. I always feel like I'm selling cars every time I share that number, but it's just for your attendance. Part of our efforts just to keep people from falling through the cracks and to make people know that we're still gathering together as a body, even in an unconventional sort of way. We do have several that we need to remember in our prayers. Our sister Mary Crosby is in the local hospital, and she's having some sort of an intestinal blockage that they are hoping will clear up on its own, but they did go ahead and admit her. So let's be sure to pray for her this evening. Also, Marilyn Bridgeforth is scheduled to have surgery on Tuesday, and she would definitely covet our prayers. I got to talk to Ms. Barbara Sapp this afternoon, and she was feeling better, but she actually asked if we would pray for her brother who lives up in Kentucky. He's had a stroke, and we would pray for him. Numerous people who are positive for the coronavirus. Obviously, that's why we're here. So please remember them in your prayers, but especially this evening, I think it would be appropriate a special word of prayer for Miss Kathy Hutchinson, who also tested positive for COVID today, and she'd asked that we would share that with you. Not really having any symptoms from that right now, but obviously something she needs to be pretty concerned about. So let's be sure to remember Gary and Kathy in our prayers in the coming days. A lot of folks for us to remember. I wanted us tonight to think about a pretty familiar Bible passage. You ever been around someone and you wonder, well, how do they know that? How do they know so much about this? Or how do they know so much about that? Well, in Matthew chapter 2, there's a scene that's familiar probably to all of us. It's a scene of the birth of Jesus. And, of course, Jesus is born there in Bethlehem. This is Matthew chapter 2 and verse 1. After Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea in the days of Herod the king, that behold, Magi from the east arrived in Jerusalem, saying, "Where is he who has been born King of the Jews? For we have seen his star in the east and have come to worship him." Well, when Herod the king heard it, he was troubled, and all of Jerusalem with him. And gathering together all the chief priests and the scribes of the people, he began to inquire of them where the Christ was to be born. And they said to him, "In Bethlehem of Judea, for so has it been written by the prophet." Now that might be a question that we would struggle to answer. Now, where exactly is the Messiah supposed to be born? Well, I know this from Matthew chapter 2, but Matthew chapter 2 didn't exist at that point. How did they know that? Well, they knew that because they'd been studying from the prophet Micah. And I want us this evening just to kind of give an overview of this great prophet and some of the things that we can learn from him that will help us in our lives, but they'll also help us to understand better the context of the New Testament, and in particular what's going on here in Matthew chapter 2. Now, Micah was a prophet that prophesied to the southern kingdom of Judah. He prophesied roughly around the same time as Isaiah. So it's a time of a great deal of transition. Our attention is being taken off of the northern kingdom, and now it's seeming to come upon the sin of that southern kingdom of Judah. And Micah, like all the other prophets, and you can be turning there in your Bibles to the prophet Micah, like all the other prophets, has an incredibly intense message of condemnation. And I don't really know any other way to put it. He's trying to convict them of the fact that, listen, you have sinned. You've sinned against God, and I'm telling you that punishment is coming because of that. We can just read just a little bit in this first chapter of Micah. He's in verse 3, he says, "Behold, the Lord is coming forth from his place, and he will come down and tread on the high places of the earth. And the mountains will melt under him, and the valleys will split like wax before the fire, like water poured down a steep place. And all this is for the rebellion of Jacob, for the sins of the house of Israel." What is the rebellion of Jacob? Is it not Samaria? What is the high place of Judah? Is it not Jerusalem? For I will make Samaria a heap of ruins in the open country, planting places for a vineyard. I will pour her stones down into the valley, and I will lay bare her foundation. And all of her idols will be smashed, and all of her earnings will be burned with fire, and all of her images I will make desolate. For she collected them from a harlot's earnings, and to the earnings of a harlot they will return. Well, I mean, that's pretty strong language, right? And you knew that there was strong language there, but it's not really the strong language I want to focus on for just a moment. It's what comes next, in particular in verse 8. It's the preceding verse when he says, "Because of this, I must lament and wail. I must go barefoot and naked. I must make a lament like the jackals, and a mourning like the ostrich." Now, understand, in the context of incredible condemnation, as he describes this message of condemnation, he also describes it as a lament. You see, there are many things in this world that we must speak out against. Sin still exists in our world, and God is still going to condemn that sin, whether it exists in my life or your life or in the world at large. But as we deal with those things, do we lament those things? Does it break our hearts to have to talk about those things? You know, there have been times when maybe in my own life, I know I've seen it in other places, where it almost seems as if people are taking joy out of a message of condemnation. More that, you know, they're really giving them what they deserve. Well, it may be what they deserve. But he says to even speak of these things is to lament before God. "Because of this, I must lament and wail." He describes his lament like the jackals, or even the mourning like an ostrich. Now, I don't have a clue what an ostrich sounds like. Maybe you do. It's probably on the internet somewhere. You could hear what an ostrich sounds like. But it's just this, you know, whatever the idea of this animal that's just moaning on and on in such terrible grief and such terrible anguish. He says, as I say these things to you, that's really what's going on. It reminds me of Jesus when he issues one of the most scathing rebukes. One of the most scathing rebukes that he will ever give to the nation of Israel and to the people of Israel. And as he comes forth with that, he says, "Oh, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, how I desired to take you under my wings, but you would not." See, Jesus understood not only condemnation, but he understood what it meant to lament in the midst of that condemnation. Well, this goes on and on. And if you want to really know what it was that they were doing, well, at the base of a lot of their issues were this idea that those people who were in power were neglecting and abusing those people who had no power. In Micah chapter 2, he says, woe to those who scheme iniquity, who work out evil on their beds, and when morning comes they do it. For it is in the power of their hands. They covet fields and seize them, and houses and take them away. They rob a man and his house, a man and his inheritance. Therefore, thus saith the Lord, behold, I am planning against this family a calamity from which you cannot remove your necks, and you will not walk haughtily, for it will be an evil time. It makes you think, I think it would have to, of Naboth's vineyard. You remember? And how those who had power abused their power to take from those who did not have. Or maybe a more familiar example might be the example that Nathan used when he came to confront King David. You remember about the man who had many sheep, but he decided he wanted the sheep, the single lamb of the man who only had one? And David was outraged, and he said, well, you are the man. You're the one who's doing that. That's what they were doing. Those who had power were abusing those who did not have power. You know, in a day where we talk a great deal about social justice. Listen, social justice, there are many ways that's a very abused concept. I don't think I don't have to point very far to show how that's being abused in our world today. But at its core, listen, that's a biblical idea. That those who have power ought not abuse others with that power, but they ought to use it for the good. The prophet Micah touches on these things. If you want to learn more about this, go and read the book of Amos. The book of Amos is going to speak very directly to these things. But this is what was going on, not in the world. This is what was going on amongst God's people. And so because of that, he was issuing this message of condemnation to them. As a matter of fact, his message was so severe, it was actually quoted. If you look over in passages like Jeremiah 26, Jeremiah was also a prophet. He wrote a lot more than Micah, but he was a prophet who had some real negative things to say. And well, because he had some negative things to say, the people didn't always take kindly to that. And so there began this great discussion of maybe we should kill him, right? Maybe we need to shut him up and to get rid of him. And so in Jeremiah 26, they're having this discussion about what to do.